There's been a steady flow of people that have been coming to me and expressing their stress, or like having suicidal ideation, dreaming of all kinds of catastrophic events, starting to hallucinate all kinds of things. Some people even saying that they're experiencing physiological stress response. Some people have a history of it, and then some of these people have not. And I know that it's something to do with the Uranus-Pluto Square, and I've just been trying to figure out how to explain it. I've been dabbling with a couple different theories, and I'm getting closer. I just looked at the original symbols and looked through all my reference books for word associations, and just tried to keep it simple, because overthinking it sometimes you miss the bigger picture. I definitely do that. So Uranus, the first thing I think of that I associate with it is trauma. That could be karmatic trauma, natal trauma, evolutionary trauma, trauma in general. The planet Aquarius, in an evolutionary or a karmatic sense, signifies trauma in one way, shape, or form, or struggle. So, and then I was thinking, okay, so if that is for Uranus, then I was looking at associations with Pluto. The first thing that I found was obviously power. And I was just looking at the words on my board, and I was like, power, trauma, power. And I'm like, powerful trauma, intense trauma. And then I was imagining in my head, I was actually watching RT and seeing some.
There are fears the number of lives lost in twin suicide bombings in Beirut may rise. So far, 43 deaths have been confirmed by the Lebanon Health Ministry, while 239 people are injured. Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the attack. The bombers blew themselves up during rush hour at around 6 p.m. local time. The blasts went off a short distance from each other. The first outside a Shiite mosque, while the other occurred at a nearby bakery. It's understood the second attacker detonated the bomb about 7 minutes later, while people were rushing to help those injured in the first explosion. The upcoming video purportedly shows the moment of the second blast. The attacks
and you see like a flood of immediate area going over there to try to help people. Another person ran right in there. They actually showed of him blowing up people and the bodies just spreading like confetti everywhere. And I was just like, wow. I was like, those people must be in shock. So then I thought about it, and I'm like, shock. So I went and Googled. I started looking up shock from trauma. Found a couple of things here for a medical dictionary. And then I found acute stress reaction. And then I kind of read into this, and it says psychological shock. Another term that is associated with Pluto is the psyche. Trauma, psyche. Psychological shock, trauma. Psychological trauma. So, when these two planets were squaring, which obviously, because of them being outer influential planets, it took quite a bit for it to energy to actually like hit us directly. And I also have a theory that the eclipses that have been happening are playing into why we're now getting this huge rush of acute stress reaction.
From what we talked about this morning about Scorpio with betrayal and abandonment, these can be traumatic experiences. So when you see an entire generation of Pluto in Scorpio, or 18 months of South Node in Scorpio, you're going to tend to see a lot of traumatized people coming in with those kind of symbols.
You're looking at the transiting Neptune through Aquarius. So all of the spiritual trauma that is inherent in little souls that are coming onto the planet. So anywhere you see the Aquarius 11th house or Uranus signatures will show where there's trauma. And think about it, if we've had distortion via human-made conditioning on the planet for the last 7,000-8,000 years in some way or another. Who of us do not have unconscious trauma? So, the dual nature of the archetypes, whereas Aquarius in the 11th house can represent the trauma, it is also the archetype that represents the liberation from the trauma. As Annie just said, the ability to detach and objectify and see that larger picture, and then 11th house related to the 5th house to get in there and get back in touch with self Leo. To be who you are. This is who I am. This is what my needs are. I can identify with myself. I have a right to be here. I have a right to be healthy. I have a right to be loved and loving. I have a right to live. This is how Leo starts to relate to all of this Aquarian archetype.
In terms of getting the Uranian messages that repeat themselves, if you make the effort to follow that direction, then you would move into liberation relative to the future blueprint.
Yes.
But if you ignore it, is that what specifically leads into trauma?
You can increase the trauma. You can intensify the trauma. So when you get the repeated future-oriented messages, even if they seem radically different than your current reality, if the message keeps coming and it's your own soul speaking to you or source speaking through you, okay? So some of those blueprints of the future, those repeated messages, that's your own soul trying to return to natural law, to return to what is natural for you, to move in the directions that are natural for you. There's 3 types of unconscious information. There's all of that trauma from all those past lives that you've ever lived. There is everything you're suppressing in this lifetime. And then there's the blueprints of the future. For many of us, one of the things in being able to liberate from the trauma is to become conscious of the trauma that's back there suppressed. So when you get those dreams and you get those messages and oh my gosh, it's all this trauma that's going on, this is the stuff that your soul, it doesn't want to suppress it anymore. This is why anytime you see transits of planets through the 11th house or through Aquarius, there is the trauma that's trying to come to the surface. Look at Neptune in Aquarius right now from 98 through 2011. There's all this spiritual trauma. So all of us could have messages coming up of when we have been traumatized for our beliefs in past lives.
Planets retrograde in somebody's chart. This is typical. There's a review. The key phrase is, in order to go forwards, you first have to go backwards, because there's something
Yes.
there that needs to be recaptured.
Yes.
That's what's holding you back.
We are looking at a paradigm for which we can all know our past in order to do what Steve said, to move forward. And so what we have is some of those in the astrological community who feel threatened by this, who want to deny this, who don't want to have any of this stuff. My point is that there are those in the metaphysical community who don't want to look under the rug, who want to ignore the white elephant, who don't want to work with past life. Now, if you talk to any of the avatars that are out there, or if you listen to any of, what we call these highly evolved souls, they have become conscious of everything. What's that whole natural law? Expanding our consciousness so much there is nothing that is hidden anymore. So we've got to face the trauma. We've got to work with all of that. And so what I will tell a client, because sometimes even bringing this subject up is just, whoa. They just don't even want to go there. And I just say, look at it this way. Sometimes your current life is just repeating some of the patterns. And so if you can make sense of what your patterns are in this life, you can get some understanding of what that past life stuff is. If it doesn't work for you to go to that past life stuff, it's okay. When you're ready, then you can go there. Just understand in this broad context that you must become fully conscious of everything about yourself. And as you intend to evolve, if you and I desire to know source, I desire to go home, you're going to be made aware of everything that prevents you from going home, the trauma that's suppressed and buried.
So what she's talking about in this video about the liberation and the messages coming to you, the physical telephone that is connected to you is Neptune. Neptune is the line of communication. So some people that are sensitives have some sort of visions, intuitive flashes, or the majority of people experience all kinds of things in their dreams. It's the area that Neptune rules, and that's when your soul and your subconscious mind can communicate to you without any kind of interference. So anybody born between 1984 to 1998, those people, because they have Capricorn as their Neptune, they have that energy of Saturn that is trying to suppress line of communication. So it limits your inner being to send you repeated future-oriented messages through dreams. You're one of those people who doesn't have those kind of experiences with dreams ever, or has never had one. The way that this energy will then end up manifesting is through some sort of physiological or psychological mental trauma. So that's how the acute stress disorder ties into this, because that was another thing I was struggling to explain. With the definition of acute stress disorder, it says it's the reaction to an actual event. So I was thinking to myself, well, if I was randomly watching this video out of context and I didn't know what was going on, the first argument I would bring is like, well, what event are we talking about? We're talking about karmatic events. So as you heard her in the video in the beginning, she said, well, one of the people in the class or the lecturer said, what about the Pluto Scorpio generation being a traumatized generation? And on top of that, 18 months out of that period in that generation, the South Node was in Scorpio. So not only are they reincarnated as a traumatic entity, but it signifies that their past life was as equally or more traumatic than this one. I don't know how you pass on to the next level, I guess. But those people got the short end of the stick twice now. So they're the generation that is introducing this traumatic signature back into the physical world. Then, the very end of Pluto Scorpio generation, Neptune goes into Aquarius. So as you saw in my caption and what you're gathering from what she's saying, anything Aquarius related is somehow linked, connected, or a source of trauma. So Neptune being in Aquarius, and Neptune is supposed to be that channel between your soul and you. So essentially the entire essence of that line of communication is to communicate trauma experiences, things that are going to traumatize that person. So that's also why a lot of people that are born between 1998 to 2011 are going to have all kinds of stereotypical symptoms of traumatic stress disorder, and they're the ones that will also be affected by this acute distress disorder as well. And there will likely continue to be more suicides with people between this age group. Specifically, there's been a huge increase of suicides since the Pluto Scorpio generation started. So from 1984 to 2011 will likely be one of the largest numbers calculated for suicides because of all this trauma. So now we look at right now. We went into Neptune and Pisces. Pisces, as I've tried to explain in other videos, and Pisces is the confusing sign because it is essentially the schizophrenic sign of the zodiac, because it is supposed to make sense of everybody. So when Aries is like, me, mine, I come first, yeah, it's really easy for you to focus on yourself when you're the first person in line. There's no relation to the other people that are behind you, especially since Aries is always straightforward and they never look back. they don't even know those people exist. So Pisces, at the end of the line, has been watching every single archetype. I'm talking about in a metaphysical, evolutionary sense. Has been watching every archetype enter the scene, watching their pitfalls, secretly seeing their wounds, their mistakes, and the traumatic experiences that they've been exposed to, because Pisces is a water sign, and it creates like an ingrained traumatic reel. They are the photo album of everybody else's trauma. So Neptune and Pisces, the entire lesson that we're supposed to learn from Pisces as an archetype is reintegration and understanding that every single one of those archetypes is a part of a bigger system, a greater whole, the macrocosm concept. So with Neptune going into Pisces, if we use the example that Aquarius and Neptune, the line of communication between the soul and the person is to relate trauma messages. The communication between Neptune and Pisces, the soul and the person, would be to reveal all the conscious trauma that has been inflicted upon all of the archetypes for this last age. And since we were coming out of the dark ages, where they lock you in a dark room and you go crazy kind of thing, we're now subconsciously reliving and sitting in that dark room with whoever was breaking down. Think back to what I was just saying. The Neptune and Capricorn generation, Saturn restricts the communication ability between you and Neptune, basically you and your soul. So the majority of the people that are having anxiety, having physical illness, and they can't explain it, I'm pretty sure most of them are in the Neptune Capricorn generation. So as I was saying, Neptune is supposed to be the line of communication. Your soul doesn't want to suppress any of its trauma anymore, like she was saying in that lecture. So what your soul essentially tries to do is it attempts to connect through your dreams with you, or deja vu, like synchronistic kind of, funny coincidences that keep reoccurring. I'm not talking about like one little coincidence, but like really odd, peculiar, that kind of make you uneasy. If it can't get to you through your dreams, and you're not an intuitive where you can just feel those things, see those things, and the deja vu thing doesn't work if it's even able to manifest that. If you fail to receive those intuitive flashes, those dreams, visions, or messages, then all that pressure that the soul does not want to suppress anymore, all that trauma that needs to come out, will then manifest in your psyche. And as they've been proving with certain neurological studies with illness, unless it's infectious, all illness is attributed to your state of mind and well-being. So if Neptune controls your subconscious, and the last resort is to interject those messages to your subconscious, then your subconscious will then be overwhelmed and start to project that trauma through physical manifestations of illness, stress, anxiety, anger. And so I was looking at a reference online for emotional and psychological trauma, and it says emotional and psychological symptoms of trauma: shock, denial, disbelief, anger, irritability, mood swings, guilt, shame, self-blame, feeling sad or hopeless, confusion, difficulty concentrating, anxiety disorders, fear, withdrawing from others, feeling disconnected, or feeling numb and empty. Then physical symptoms. So for people who are not only are born in the Neptune Capricorn generation, but have a over-exaggerated to the point of unhealthy signature of Saturn or Capricorn in their chart, the physiological symptoms are going to be something that will correlate with you more than any of the emotional or psychological ones. So it says for physical symptoms, insomnia or nightmares, being startled easily, racing heartbeat, aches, pains, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, edginess, agitation, and muscle tension. These symptoms and feelings typically last for a few days, but could last up to a few months, gradually fading as you process the trauma. So here's the kicker. If the trauma that the Uranus-Pluto Square is making us face, because Pluto is forcing change. That's what Pluto does. It forces transformation. It forces change. It forces the transition from life to death. So Uranus squaring Pluto, Pluto is forcing Uranus to bring out the trauma. So other people who have not started to go through the liberation process of the trauma are now the ones suffering the most from illness, stress, or having all kinds of like emotional and psychotic delusions or issues like that, or the ones that are starting to get this fear and start to develop these ideations of Armageddon and all that. Until you actually explore your own past, and even if you don't want to get into the concept of past lives, like she was saying in that clip, if you just understand your own personal patterns and how life has started from the moment you were born to up to now, and start to see some patterns of trauma or patterns where you've been hurt or wounded, they will give you some sort of idea. It should, in theory of syncretism, match up with your previous life if you're not into that sort of thing. And then with trauma, regardless of what it is, there is a grieving process. It may not necessarily be what you're thinking is grieving, but it's basically processing it, coming to understand it and accepting what happened. That's a different kind of grieving. So, assuming you actually figure out what the oppressed trauma is, you still have to deal with the grieving process, and you also have to be aware of triggers, because like with any kind of traumatizing event, you could even attribute this to a traumatic incident that you recall in your conscious memories. That there's certain triggers, like certain smells, certain things that you see, certain dates that would remind you of a traumatizing event. You cannot liberate yourself and free yourself from this painstaking trauma, these physiological stress responses, which is the acute stress disorder, until you explore and understand what traumatized you or what is traumatizing you, and find a way to come to terms with it and accept it. So referencing my abnormal psychology, I actually found a chapter that's about abnormal behavior in ancient times, and Hippocrates, who is arguably the father of modern medicine, as well as the infamous contributor to medical astrology, apparently not only was he attempting to explain and develop some sort of diagnosis for mental disorders, but he believed that mental disease was the result of natural causes of brain pathology. Hippocrates considered dreams to be important in understanding the patient's, not only him being an astrologer, but him also being a physician. He tapped into people's dreams in order to help resolve some of their psychological issues. And the planet that is associated with dreams is Neptune, and Neptune is in Pisces right now, and Neptune in Pisces is known for all kinds of mass delusions, and its opposition, Jupiter, in the 6th house of health, which could be associated with not only physiological health, but mental health as well. And Jupiter, everything it aspects, as well as its touching, with which would be conjunct, it magnifies it. So essentially, the opposition that's going on between Jupiter and Virgo with Neptune and Pisces is magnifying illusions that Neptune and Pisces brings. And the eclipses reoccurring on a frequent basis are actually supposed to be some sort of deep-rooted energy, emotions that are being suppressed either consciously or subconsciously, are pushed to the surface, just squeezed out from any orifice that, as you could imagine, is probably a painful process. Well, in a metaphysical standpoint, it would be a painful emotional or psychological process. So the Uranus-Pluto Square, Uranus representing trauma and Pluto representing psyche, that would cause acute stress reaction, is now being magnified even more based breakdown or something from stress, which actually the psychological effects of long-term stress, it says coping forth when the resistance begins to fail, psychological integration. The latter reactions may be characterized as psychological disorganization and a break with reality involving delusions and hallucinations. These delusions appear to be represent increasingly disorganized thoughts and perceptions, along with desperate efforts to salvage psychological integration with self-integrity by resurrecting reality. And it says, eventually, if the excessive stress continues, the process of decompensation proceeds to the stage of severe psychological disorganization, perhaps involving continuous uncontrolled violence, apathy, stupor, and perhaps even death or suicide. Physiological manifestation of the Uranus-Pluto Square is causing acute stress disorder. With Neptune and Pisces being Jupiter and Virgo, it is causing, not only are we experiencing the psychological effects of long-term stress, we haven't started to feel the total ramifications of the Uranus-Pluto Square. The Uranus-Pluto Square started having alignment 7 years ago. So we've been slowly going through some sort of stressful journey, and it's been increasing and been intensifying. So we've obviously, a lot of us have been experiencing the psychological effects of long-term stress. And even without any kind of environmental factors to cause a stress response, some of us, especially if we have strong Mercuries, or if we have a lot of air qualities in our chart, we're already going to be prone for nervous tension. So those are the people that are really going to be feeling it hardcore, are people who have afflictions to Mercury or Uranus, or people who have a lot of air quality in their chart are going to be feeling all this kind of psychological disarray. I ran out of space on my phone, but just where I left off on the video, I'm not saying that some of the intuitive flashes that people are probably experiencing or remembering from their dreams doesn't have any kind of validity to it, but keep in mind too that a lot of it is likely going to be symbolic. I'm not saying that there won't be death, because you saw the clip that I added in this video. There's been death going on for quite some time, and it's been getting increasingly worse. The way that people experience and empathize with any kind of tragedies is they imagine if their loved ones or things in their personal world were exposed to the same kind of catastrophe or destruction. If anybody's having any kind of dreams or that they feel like are being consistent or just way too vivid about people that they know dying or anything like that, if that's, unless you're an intuitive or something like that, I wouldn't necessarily start freaking out too much about it. I'm not saying ignore them, because obviously Neptune is trying to tell you something that you've been suppressing, hence what my theory is with the eclipses. But this actually kind of goes into more of a lecture that I'm working on. I was kind of just getting the bits and pieces together. So this is the astrotheology's golden, it's not just astrotheology, it's associates with a lot of Eastern philosophy too. But basically, this is supposed to be the timeline here. Some people have probably heard of the star Sirius. So it's essentially supposed to be another sun that's way out there, obviously. We haven't known about it for too long, because first we didn't have the technology. And then secondly, it's been coming closer to us. Not at a fast rate, but still, nonetheless.
What is happening at this moment is discussed in all the Bibles and mythologies of the world. The ancient ones knew the cycles. The Hindus call these cycles the Yuga cycle of 24,000 years, in which we go through the gold, silver, bronze and iron age, just like we go through the yearly summer, winter, and the daily night and day. So we do this in the 24,000 year backward precessional cycle. And we are at what the prophecies say is the time of the harvest, the time of the end of this wave of evolution of mankind, where certain ones ascend, awaken, remember who they are and reclaim their divinity. What is really, in fact, going to happen is the galactic alignment in two respects. If you look at the galactic plane, if you imagine the galaxy as a very, very thin dish in the heavens, well, our sun, it's in a cycle of 24,000 years called precession of the equinoxes. And during that cycle, it spends 12,000 years above the equator of the Milky Way galaxy, the galactic plane, and 12,000 years below. So our sun is now sitting below that galactic plane, and it's popping its head through and it's passing that galactic plane right now as we speak, and on the 21st of December 2012 it'll be more over than under. The other aspect of this is that the equinoxes have been migrating around the heavens through the signs of the zodiac for 24,000 years. The vernal equinox occurs on the 21st of March. Now, at the moment, on the 21st of March, it's actually Pisces, because it's the sign that appears on the horizon on the 21st of March. That sign is the sign that we're in. Now, we've been in that sign, the sun has been in it at the equinox for 2,000 years. Now, it's right at the end of Pisces, and the new sign coming through is Aquarius. And the sun will be in Aquarius for 2,000 years. And Aquarius is an air sign. It's a fixed air. So its nature is quite different to the mutable water of Pisces. We've been in a mutable cross for 2,000 years. The equinoxes, and they've been in the mutable signs of Pisces. This is the March equinox, Virgo, the other equinox, and the solstices have been in Gemini, the solstice of June the 21st, and Sagittarius, December the 21st. Now what's happening is, as those equinoxes move around that clock and they come into the fixed signs, what's going to happen is this. The vernal equinox will be in Aquarius, the autumnal equinox will be in Leo, which is fixed fire, the solstice will go to Taurus, fixed earth, and the winter solstice will go to Scorpio, fixed water. Now these four signs are the fixed signs. So the Holy Cross, the divine cross in the skies, will be situated in their most natural home, the fixed signs. Well, in this age it's been in Pisces, which is mutable, and before that it was in Aries, which is cardinal. So now it gets to be fixed. And that is the alignment. That is what's taking place, because those signs there are very, very powerful, the fixed signs. They're very powerful in the transformation of the human consciousness. And in the Bible and in the holy books, they are the lion, the bull, the man, and the eagle. In Revelation, God is described as having the face of a man, the face of a bull, the face of an eagle, and the face of a lion. Well, that's the fixed signs of the zodiac. They're going home. The equinoxes and the solstices are going home. And that is what we're looking forward to. Just a great time in history to be living. It's just an amazing time. The great changes that we will see with our own eyes will just be stupendous. The new world of love is coming.
So here is our sun, and if you look at this, we had different ages: the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, the Silver Age, and the Golden Age. The Golden Age is actually what is referred to as heaven in the Bible. So, and there's a scripture, I'm sure I butchered it, but it's essentially something along these lines. It says, God is love, God is light, God is a blazing fire. Those are supposed to be scriptures in the book of Daniel, I believe, that describe God. So God is Helios, and when you translate Helios, it actually translates to Jesus or Jesus. So God, the sun, the light, the life bringer, because without the sun, we wouldn't have our ecosystem and agriculture, and we'd all be dead and depressed with calcium deficiency or whatever. Another fascinating thing here is that the Iron Age is also known as the Dark Age, the Dark Ages. So the reason why there was so much mass delusion with religion, lock somebody in a dark room by themselves for a long period of time, they're going to go a little crazy. So just use that kind of psychological metaphor for the age of Pisces. So, and the age of Pisces was curving around this dark age corner of the ecliptic. So this is like the galactic center, actually, in the middle of this. And just like the nodes for the moon are the edges of the orbit, this is the edge of the galactic center. So our sun has been at the edge of the galactic center, and known as the Iron Age. So how does this tie into the Uranus-Pluto Square thing? So I was thinking about it. Uranus is unconscious trauma from past lives, future lives. Basically, you're stuck with it. It's a tattoo, it's a scar, it's a wound, it's not going away. So it's something that you're predetermined to have for however many times your soul is going to continue to reincarnate till it gets to go and you get $200. I'm just kidding. But anyway, so as I was saying, Uranus represents trauma, and it can give you an idea of past life trauma. So if we carry that trauma from past lives with us, and we have no idea theoretically how many times we've reincarnated, let's just say, we have all this epic trauma going on. And I'm sure, when we were in the golden age and we were golden, we didn't really have that much trauma going on, because that's the whole point. This is the ultimate enlightenment. When both suns come together, we're completely absorbed by light, love, life, so we don't have to worry about that. We understand that everything is a part of the same system, and we don't have to rely on our faith or guessing because we're not left in the dark. You see what I'm saying? We are going to be transitioning into the age of Aquarius. The age of Aquarius is going to be, I would presume, it's argued by different astrologers, that it's going to be the Bronze Age. Some Eastern philosophies think we're already into the Bronze Age, and the Aquarius Age is actually going to bring us to the Silver Age. But, I mean, none of us are going to be alive for that in this life, so let's not even argue about it. But anyway, so if we're coming out through this, and there's all these eclipses going on because there's going to be change that has to happen, and Pluto is now forcing trauma out of Uranus with this Uranus-Pluto Square. Which now, if you want to look at it from a Carl Jung perspective, the unconscious collective is now projecting their past trauma from the Dark Ages, the Crusades and all that, into the present world. So with all the suicide bombers, all the disease coming up, people being stupid and deciding not to give their kids vaccines, and then people going, basically reversing back in intelligence, more or less, just degenerating. So it's as if we're being pulled back into this because we need to acknowledge that the dark... So I don't have my board for the galactic center and the great cycles up anymore because I was doing other notes. But right where I was leaving off, we have to acknowledge that the Dark Ages was a part of not only our history, but that we contributed to the trauma that was pretty much plagued all of humanity. And that's a horrible pun. I should not be making a pun like that. But Scorpio Mercury, I can't help my morbid sense of humor. But so we need to acknowledge the dark parts of who we were, who we are now, because it's still there within us. And we also need to acknowledge that slaughtering people for unjustified reasons because we were the crazy person in the dark, with my little, metaphor that I use for the Dark Ages, for the trauma, for us to be liberated from the trauma collectively, it needs to be recognized. We need to acknowledge all of it, take accountability for it, have some closure with it, become unified. And this also totally makes sense with the conclusions I was coming to with my Neptune and Pisces video. We have to understand that on a macrocosm level, we need to recognize that not only are we all connected just as creatures and human beings, but that there are people who, in our minds, existed in history long ago that are somehow connected to us, but that it's even bigger than that. We essentially were either bits and pieces of those people, and I'm not talking about genetically. For all the skeptics, smartasses out there, they'll probably watch this and try to make some arguments about it. But on a karmatic evolutionary astrology level, some of those people were us. And the traumas and certain personal struggles that we're dealing with on a microcosmic level are the karma lessons that were basically forced upon us because of the atrocities that we committed throughout this age of Pisces. So in order for us to be liberated and ascend to the next cycle of the great cycles, and then eventually closer to the golden age, we have to shed all the darkness from us. We have to open up the consciousness so there is nothing left to hide. And we have to remove the iron shackles of the Dark Age.